Thank you all very much. It is my pleasure to be here. It is an even greater pleasure to be here with these distinguished panelists to discuss the issue of sustainable communities. But you've got to ask, who's not for building sustainable communities? Nobody's going to admit to a fervent, irresistible desire to build weak, expensive, shaky, energy-wasting, job-killing, rapidly deteriorating communities. Where we differ is not even in what we mean by sustainable communities. We all know that the world we live in now and the way we are living in it is not sustainable. Where we differ is how we get there. And that's why we're here today to discuss the hows. How do we invest in a green healthcare system? What is a green healthcare system? The one we had clearly wasn't sustainable, but opponents of the healthcare reform law intended to correct that claim they too want a sustainable healthcare system. They just don't want to be forced into one. What do our panelists say? How do we make our schools more efficient and cleaner for kids at a time when budgets are being cut at every level of government? How do we do that? How do we invest more in public transit infrastructure and different modes of transportation while maintaining our love affair with large gas-guzzling automobiles? Can't we just eat our cake and have it too? How do we ensure product safety without limiting our freedom to choose bad stuff or without regulations that some say will kill jobs? And how do we recycle more, clean up our water supply, build a more efficient communications infrastructure? Hello? Can you hear me now? How about now? Can you hear me? How can we do all this in a political environment that's, well, you know what the political environment is. So the question remains, how? How? Questions which, as I said, it will be my distinct pleasure to pose to our panelists. Hopefully, they will also be just as pleased to answer. Please welcome U.S. Congressman Keith Ellison of the 5th District of Minnesota. He is a Democrat. And a personal hero of mine. Lawrence Hanley is International President of the Amalgamated Transit Union. Kathy Gerwig is Vice President for Workplace Safety and Environmental Stewardship Officer with Kaiser Permanente. And Clark Manus is President of the American Institute of Architects. Congressman Ellison, allow me to start with you. Can you tell us what you think it means to have a sustainable community?
Well, let me first start by saying that yes, all people declare for sustainability. All politicians declare for sustainability. Some mean it, and some don't. I mean, and the reality is that on the one hand, you have people who literally are for sustainability, and on the other hand, you have people who are, their primary concern is their quarterly profit margin, right? So you know, of course, theoretically, nobody's against sustainability, but some people have other considerations that outcompete sustainability. But what I mean by sustainability and what I think we can do easily is just look at the construct of our lives. Okay, so we wake up in the house, right? And in that house, we got to heat it, right? And then we gotta eat some breakfast. Hopefully the food will be close by where we live. Then we gotta get to work or school or where we're going. And then we've got to work in that facility for a while. And then we gotta come home and maybe do some other stuff. A sustainable community is where the links of the chains of our lives are constructed in a way that is designed to last in a perpetual way, and then also to promote independence, to promote maximum efficiency, promote innovation. This means that in our homes, we should promote green, healthy homes. We should promote efficiency, which would save a lot of money and put a lot of people back to work. And if I may say so, Kojo, 9% unemployment is a national disgrace. We should not tolerate it. And when the Humphrey Hawkins bill was passed in the 70s, we thought that 6.3% unemployment was a disgrace and passed the bill to try to do something about it. What are we doing now? Let's do something on green jobs right away with making these homes much more efficient. I'm proud to say that in the Recovery Act, the stimulus bill, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, we put a lot of money into home weatherization. This is an investment in that home thing that we start out in the morning. But we've got to do a lot more about making sure that the travel that our breakfast gets from the field to our house is very short. And we got to make sure that we invest in infrastructure. This is transit. This is high-speed rail. And we've got to make sure that people who want to work from home can work from home. That even means in the rural parts of our country, which need to be wired just like our nation need to be electrified back in the 1930s. And so this is what I mean by sustainability. It's not a thing. We have the brains to do it. We have the smarts to do it. We know how to do it. We've got to have the political will to do it. And those of us who understand the urgency of it have got to use advocacy and align our policy with our values. And we actually have to just get into a real struggle with people who, quite frankly, want to have invested interest in the status quo, which is why they don't really come around to sustainability so quick.
How will that political will be affected by the fact that in the last Congress of the United States, your party was in the majority and in the leadership of the House of Representatives? It now is not. How are those goals and how is that political will likely to be affected by that political fact of life?
We took it on the chin, didn't we?
Yeah.
Well, let me just tell you this. I will say this about my party. I think that we focused more on doing certain things, and we didn't do near what we needed to do to try to communicate that. We were not out in the community connecting with people, and I think that the base that sent us into the majority kind of felt like, hey, where you guys been? And so I really feel like we got taken to the woodshed, and we're right now, we are gearing up to reconnect with the base that sent us there. So let me just throw this out, Kojo. What if this is just an idea, I want to see what you guys think about it. What if we had a multi-city tour for jobs and economic justice, and we culminated that thing for a jobs and economic justice rally in Washington, and force the policy choices of everybody who was in office to be strictly focused on putting Americans back to work at high-paid, livable wage jobs that are green and promote sustainability. I mean, we could pick Washington, we could pick any cities you guys want, and we could bang on this thing. I guarantee you there's a number of members of Congress who want to do it. I was recently elected co-chair of Progressive Caucus. The Progressive Caucus is for this, but there's a number of other members who really are into it as well. And we know that, and you have reminded us, that without being plugged into the people, we're just a bunch of politicians talking to each other. And we don't want to do that.
Larry Hanley, what do you think about that?
Well, when the congressman talks about the Democratic base being ignored, there's no better example, but we can start with the fact that there's no discernible urban policy in America today. There's no energy policy. We're not just watching, I'll talk about that in a second, but we have seen over the course of the last 2 years America's transit system being dismembered.
That's right.
In Detroit, beginning in Detroit, where 25% of the entire transit system was just shut down on one day in late 2009. And then from Detroit, throughout the country, in Chicago, 14% of the system was shut down last February. In New York, for the first time since probably the 50s, transit workers have been laid off in large numbers, in the thousands. We have watched the dismantling of mass transit at a time when some of us believe that there are problems with our environment and that there is global warming. Some of us understand that we have children, American children, dying around the world so that we can suck oil up from the ground. And there's an unlimited budget for armaments, for war, for bombs.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sustaining America's mobility, there's not only no will, but there's no money. And
But do you believe? But do you believe what the congressman says can in fact be accomplished? That the kind of grassroots movement around the country, emphasizing jobs, can grab the national attention in much the same way that other groups that shall remain nameless, Tea Party, was able to do when it staged rallies and marches around the country?
Well, I can tell you from having discussions in town with different labor union presidents and other officers that that's really going to be the main focus for us. I can tell you, speaking only on behalf of my own union, we are right now in the process of building coalitions all around the country. We have, as I said this recently to a very good friend of mine, Bev Scott, who's the manager of the system in Atlanta, the MARTA system. We had a long discussion about how we can build a transit industrial complex, some group of interested parties who can lobby effectively to bring transit back. And I told her, I said, Bev, I want to be clear, we're not going to invest a lot in this. We're going to invest everything in this. The only way, I mean that, the only way we're going to turn around the crisis in transit in America is if we get the people who use it, the riders, to stand up and start screaming about what's happening to their systems. I can tell you just simply in New York as an example, where I come from, while on the good side, we are investing in infrastructure. We're building and extending subway systems that will benefit us for many years to come, beginning 5 or 10 years from now. While we're doing it, we are eliminating bus service throughout the city of New York, eliminating bus service that's run for 100 years, just ripping that out of communities. And unfortunately, even though Congress, the House, including Congressman Ellison, have stood up on behalf of getting some operating aid out to transit around the country, we've had reluctance in the Senate, and very disappointingly, the Obama administration has not stepped up on this. We spent more money last year at the federal level on transit than any year in history. And yet we had record increases in fares, record cuts in service, and record layoffs, more layoffs in the transit operating end than we've had since World War II. There's something sick about that policy at a time when our children are dying to get oil from the ground. So from our point of view, this is not only a matter of sustaining our cities and sustaining our country, it's sustaining the world. And I just want everybody to know that we are actively interested in partnering with folks in the environmental community and the political community and the congressmen. And we are going out on a very active campaign in the bus stops all over the country to organize the 15 million who board buses and trains every day, to get them to become their own lobby, to challenge the highway lobby and the other lobbies and the war lobby, and to get out there and try and get transit funded. Thank you.
Believe me, in Washington, all you've got to say is, we're going to get all the metro escalators fixed, and you will have a constituency here in Washington.
We're trying.
Kathy Gerwig, the American people tend to see two healthcare systems. The television version is the one we see, patients being rushed into emergency rooms by handsome paramedics to be operated on by surgeons who are as miraculously beautiful as they are skilled. The other is the giant, faceless paperwork bureaucracy that rations who can get what kind of health care and requires death panels and donut holes in coverage. Nowhere in these two stories is the idea of health care providers as leaders in sustainability. Where does Kaiser Permanente find the room to make that happen?
Well, we do have some beautiful surgeons, I'll say, at Kaiser Permanente, but
not as many
that
as on
aside, I think it won't surprise you to understand that there is, neither of those polar opposite views is our perspective. And I think there's several reasons. We have several attributes at Kaiser Permanente that maybe are not typical. One is that our health plan and hospitals are not for profit. So we're not driven by shareholder interests or a profit motive. Our motivation is our social mission, and that mission is to improve the health of the communities we serve. And so with that, kind of the second attribute is that we get the connection between the environment and health. cancer, asthma, Parkinson's, even obesity, all have strong links to environmental contributors to those diseases. These are diseases that are affecting people's lives every single day. And if we don't do something about those environmental pollutants, then we can't deal with health effectively. So making that connection is an integral part of what we do. And the third area that I think gives us maybe a unique perspective is that Kaiser Permanente has a long and strong history with labor unions. When we were founded in the 40s, most of our health plan members were union members. And today, about a third of our health plan members came to us through a union affiliation. 80% of our workforce is unionized. That's about 92,000 people. So very strong and good relationships. We've just started, with the help of SCIU and a group called Practice Green Health, we've just started a Green Jobs training program for environmental services staff, the housekeepers in our hospitals. We've got 385 people that are going through this green training to learn how in their job as hospital housekeepers, they can work on energy conservation, water conservation, waste reduction, safer cleaning chemicals, make that all part of their jobs. So it's great for those workers. We hope that this ends up leading to a green career ladder within environmental services and healthcare. So that's an example of where we use our strong union relations, we use our social mission, and we use the connection between the environment and health to really try to put all of that into an integrated package that is what our organization stands for.
Clark Manus, buildings account for nearly half of greenhouse gas emissions, it's my understanding, and I consider home building and school efficiency a great part of how we can build a sustainable future. What is AIA doing to advance action to promote green buildings and to make homes more energy efficient, both of which not only help the environment but create jobs? And while we're talking about that, tell us a little bit about what you've been observing in China, because we are becoming more and more obsessed with our competition with China and would really like to know what they are doing in that arena.
Well, Kojo, the American Institute of Architects has existed for 154 years, and its members, which are almost about 80,000, have always had the goal of creating sustainability in their design. Actually, the Octagon, which is on the site of the Institute headquarters in DC here, is really an example of that. But I would say that one of the things that the AI has been intent on doing for probably more than 4 decades is doing everything from the use of regional design assistance teams, and in the last 6 years, sustainable design assistance teams in communities like Oxford, Mississippi, and Allentown, Pennsylvania, and even Portland, Maine, in working with communities on what is actually more than just individual buildings. Even the early evolution of the U.S. Green Building Councils, the AI membership in the Committee on the Environment were responsible for the development of those ideas in terms of what we felt was important in looking at buildings. And even the President's initiative on better buildings is really a part of trying to create more energy efficient buildings. And I would sort of go back to the question that you asked the Congressman about, the politics of is it a Democrat or Republican or a Tea Party agenda. In my mind, it is not a political agenda. If you look at building efficiency and energy efficiency, it is in everybody's interest, one, to save money and also to create a healthier environment. And those are two things that we have always been a stalwart at. Now, you asked me the question about China, and my firm in the last 5 years has, because we're on the West Coast, has begun to do more and more work in China as the opportunities for architects and employment. You talk about employment, 30% of our members have been out of work as a result of what's happened in this economy. We worked very hard with Congress on the agendas to try and put members back to work on those opportunities for green. But the difference that I've observed in our work in China is they are intent, and their elected officials are engineers. They see a problem, they put that problem to work. They don't talk it to death. And one of the things that is true in almost every project that we've been doing, large scale, they all have a remarkable sustainable communities. In fact, the client that we were meeting with yesterday is actually talking about building from beginning to end, an eco community that involves both health and fitness and diet and things that we here talk about and are great things that we want to do, but it sort of troubles me that we need to stop talking about this and we really actually need to put these things in action, because architects in every community are intent to want to help in creating an agenda that we know will be good for our children. And sustainability is a sort of generic word, but jobs, both ultimately for architects and the construction industry, are an essential part of putting our communities back to a place where we think that they will survive for eternity.
I'd like to put a general question along that line to each and any one of you who chooses to answer it, because we say we're talking about sustainable communities. You talk about what AIA has been doing, and you talk about what we as a nation have been talking about. But it seems to me that when we're talking about sustainable communities here, we're talking about building a sustainable culture. And I think that a lot of Americans have gotten used to the culture that we are in. We have a culture of convenience, and we don't like being significantly inconvenienced. And it seems to me that when you talk about building a sustainable culture, you're telling people that you have to take more responsibility personally for your environment. You have to grow used to living in a different kind of culture. How do you sell that idea?
Well, you know, Kojo, that's certainly a big part of it. And don't be discouraged about the ability to change culture. Yeah. Remember, it was only about 10, 20 years ago that somebody might light up a cigarette right up in the room. Today, it's unthinkable that somebody would do that. People used to drive drunk a few years ago. People don't do that. I mean, we change culture. It's possible to do. But that's only part of it. I mean, I want to just say this again, because it needs to be repeated. Look, the way we structure our economy is a huge part of this thing. I believe one of us said it's in everybody's interest to save money. It isn't. Some people, now look, money spent by somebody is money made by somebody else. And if I have a built-up interest around the status quo and I'm getting paid off of it, then I'm not worried about transit or good diet. I'm worried about me making money now. Can we please take off the rose-colored glasses and just admit that this is part of the equation? We have got to, I mean, you know, people say, why do we have the healthcare system we had for so many years? It's so inefficient. Because some people made fabulous amounts of money off of the status quo. Why do we have this huge military? Because some people make fabulous amounts of money off the status quo. The only way to change this is with a movement. Now, we talk about China. China is a command economy. You do what the guy ahead of you says do in China, or you end up on the business end of a jail cell. That's China. We have a democracy. That means we have to agree. So when we say, let's stop talking about it, that's how democracy works. We talk about it. We've got to convince people. It's a matter of a movement. And that is the hard work. That's when my friend here is saying we're going to go talk to transit riders. We got to talk to the transit riders. We've got to build a movement to help the majority of the people drive policy that is in the best interest, because it is true that in the long run, all of us are better off by saving money. But we've got to recognize the short-term realities. And let me just say this one point about politics. Politics can be incredibly frustrating, but the truth is, it is the way we do things in America. And so one of the main things we've got to do, and everybody who's concerned about sustainability has got to do, is we have got to fix our campaign finance system. It is killing us. It is killing us. And some of us in the House are introducing a constitutional amendment to say that a corporation is not a person. And because everybody who has a short-term financial gain or interest in gain in the status quo is going to send money to somebody in Congress who will parrot what they want them to say and will drive us off of an ecological cliff as they're got their hand out for their 30 pieces of silver.
Clark
I'm
Manus-
sorry.
No, I'm
Sorry to be so honest.
I'm glad you brought that up because Clark Manus and Larry Hanley, I would like to hear you have this conversation because what I just heard the congressman say, in fact, is that we have got to emphasize more and more access to public transit. The fact of the matter is that we have built a culture, getting back to that issue, in which we have a great many suburban communities. And those suburban communities were constructed by developers with the help of architects around the issue of having our automobiles available to be able to get where we want to go. How do we change that aspect of the culture? How do architects participate in helping us change that aspect of the culture? And it gets me to the question that I'll ultimately pose to Larry Hanley. But talk about that.
Well, let me come back to the congressman's comment about process, because I live and work in San Francisco, the land of public process, and I know it all too well. And it is a great thing. But I also, which is what every one of us is saying here and what we all believe, there are some great societal values, okay? The use of public transportation, the development of sustainable communities, those are things in some ways that we need to figure out that are less about talk and more about action. And if you sort of go back and, you know, I would not say Larry's probably far more of an expert, but I'm enough of an expert in the evolution of the way planning this community used to occur, which is that highways were the way that people did that. The General Motors and the Fords of the world actually encouraged people to use cars. Public transportation was not an option. Even in the Bay Area, they dismantled public transportation in the name of progress. And this is one of those things where I have to say we have to get back to what's important in our culture, in people in creating healthy communities that allow people to walk their communities, that allow them to be able to take advantage of those essential pieces that don't differentiate the uses that have occurred over time, where industry, and industry has changed over time, where businesses and residential, the evolution of multiple uses, the development of transit-oriented communities is emerging in a way that I think is a very good thing. We must not sort of figure out that we shouldn't continue to champion that. This is a change, I would agree, in people's attitudes as society moves forward. This is one of those incremental things. And architects, to your question, have always been in a position where their clients have driven what they think the focus is. If they want to build a single family subdivision out in the suburbs, it ends up happening, and the architect is only part of that instrument of service in delivering that. But the AIA is a professional association in the last 40 years, and what I said earlier has been far more diligent in trying to develop a strategy in working with communities that help the communities understand the depth of what their community can offer in being more sustainable, more responsible in the place that they fit in the region, the use of transportation, the use of multiple uses in the communities, all those things. And the statistic, and you talked about this at the beginning, urbanization is a given. There are more people living in cities than ever have happened in human civilization. And that is, for me, the importance of why urbanization and the way we make our cities is an exciting thing for people to be able to interact with. And people are moving back to cities in greater numbers because they see the excitement of the opportunity that exists. And quite frankly, rural and suburban, and people may feel that that's something they like, but it's not as sustainable. Putting infrastructure to places that are not allow the density to occur is just not a financially sustainable model when our resources are not as great as what we thought they originally were. So architects are there Architects have been a part of the dialogue, and I think architects now, at least in the last 10 years that I've seen, have been far more vocal in what they think those important things are, and talking to congressmen who understand the issues that are before the elected body.
Larry Hanley, one of your members said to you, sure, I make my living in public transportation, but for me, the American dream has always been to live in a home in the suburbs where I have 6 bedrooms and I can't afford that kind of living in the city, but I need to be able to live in the suburbs and I need to be able to have a car and highways to get me from one place to the other. Do you say to that person, the world is changing, it's time to change your dream?
Well, I think the world is changing and the dream is changing because of the economic hardships that are being put upon our members and the working class in America. I think that's pretty obvious. But so I think that reality is setting in, and we don't have to tell them that. And if we had at the time of the housing boom, it probably wouldn't have made a difference. But I think getting back to what the congressman said about the notion that we need to have a movement in America, I think is a really, really important point. And I note that you know, in the green movement, folks have been talking about sustainability for a long time. And somebody down at the Republican Party figured out that that's a good word. And now they're saying that things like health care and pensions and living wages are not sustainable. That's the new code word, you know. We just so we have to forget about those things because they can't be sustained. And I think that they've reframed the entire debate in this country, and we have to figure out a way to go out and reframe it again. And you know, I often think when I watch the dismantling of public transit, first of all, that public transit is a civil right. You know, it really is. If we're going to have an urban America, and I wonder just how hard Rosa Parks would find it today to get arrested. Not because of, you know, changes in the law, not because of litigation, not because of the elimination of separate but equal, but her bus wouldn't be there. And she'd have a much longer time waiting, you know? But if we are to have what we view as sustainable, right, which includes good jobs, which includes the ability for people to retire in dignity and live in a fair society, then we're going to have to go out and build a movement. And that's exactly what the congressman's talking about. And that's exactly what we in the ATU have been not only talking about but acting on. And I think that the congressman's point is sustainable, and I think we have to get out there. Really, we have to find a way, though, to overcome changes that we've seen in our lifetimes where the media has become, you know, completely controlled. And we have to find a way to create our own media.
Yep.
And, you know, from our point of view, thank you. And I guess just to go an inch deeper, you know, to let you know what we are doing already. In December, we held a conference in Chicago. We called it a boot camp, and we did it in conjunction with a great many faith-based groups and nonprofits around the country that are interested in transit. And we have already begun in numerous cities to partner our local union presidents with groups that have been in their cities for years advocating transit. And one of the comments we heard in the course of that conference, we actually debriefed our local presidents at the end. And they said, you know, I had no idea that these people were there in my city doing this work. And they were grateful to have been brought together. So in March, we're bringing together about 200 people right down here at the National Labor College, people from various community advocacy groups around the country and a whole bunch of our local presidents and every one of our members of our General Executive Board to do a second boot camp, which we will use to develop a stronger coalition around the country to which we welcome everybody. But we are, as I said earlier, going to get out there in the bus stops and partner with other organizations, including the SEIU, I know, has a plan to get out into a couple of dozen cities to make social arguments, you know, like we used to do in the 60s and 70s. You know, well, not me, I wasn't that old. I'm not that old. But I read about it, but that, I think, and I heard about it from the congressman. But really, I think it's a question of reframing the whole debate and actually going out and doing something that used to get done in this country a long time ago called organizing.
That's right.
Kathy Gerwig.
Love it.
Kathy Gerwig, I'm interested in what a green healthcare system means to you. There are a lot of good arguments that a corporation can make against taking on a sustainability agenda. It's a distraction from our core mission. We have too much going on now, especially in these bad economic times. The sustainability branding isn't consistent with our market position. This audience includes a lot of other corporate leaders and many of the people who work for those corporations.
Well, picking up on something the Congressman said about, it's about the money, what I would say is that's true, and corporations that are not focused on sustainability and not bringing that into their operations are throwing money away. There is good money to be made by being environmentally responsible. If there's one myth I would love to bust, it's that being green costs more. It's just not true. Of course you can build a green building that costs more, but you don't have to. Just last year alone, we saved $26 million by buying products that were environmentally preferable. That's one organization in 1 year. It's serious money. And we reduce waste. We use less toxic materials. We make business decisions by looking at the total cost of ownership. So instead of looking at device by unit device cost, you look at the total cost of ownership. What we found is it turns out that when you buy toxic materials, there's a price to pay at some point over the cost of that ownership. So I think educating people, encouraging businesses to look at that ROI, encouraging workers, labor unions to help educate people that it's not just good for business, it's good for workers. You reduce injuries, you reduce exposure to toxic chemicals by taking some of these actions. So I think it's smart for business, and we've proven it, and you can all help by educating folks on those same kinds of principles.
Congressman Ellison, let's speak in more specific terms. The Transportation Reauthorization Bill continues to get extensions, but what we need, I think, are real investments in our transportation infrastructure. We've talked about including transit, rail, buses, and so forth. President Obama spoke about the importance of infrastructure in his State of the Union address. Do you think this will be the year where we finally pass a transportation reauthorization bill with 21st century investments and 21st century goals?
My answer is resoundingly yes, if we get out there and demand that it be done. If we are not active and engaged citizens, then the chances actually aren't really that good, Kojo. But if we say, if we show up on the Capitol steps and say, infrastructure now, we will get it. And now here's the thing. Do you mind if I just say, look, infrastructure in my city of Minneapolis, infrastructure deterioration costs us the lives of 13 of our city members. 13 people died when the 35W bridge collapsed into the Mississippi. And that's just the worst part of the tragedy. When I went through the local hospital, Hennepin County Hospital, I met with about 100 people who had serious spinal and back injuries as their cars plummeted 65 feet into the Mississippi, and they survived. Now, that's just the very worst part of letting infrastructure deteriorate. The other thing is the Society of Engineers say that we have well over $1 trillion of just infrastructure maintenance. That's just making sure that the gusset plates on those old bridges are replaced and are up to date. To really put in a 21st century infrastructure, I'm telling you folks, I'm promising you, it will take our concerted effort and sustained demand. Are you willing to help do that? It will put people to work. It will make our society cleaner and greener. It will make you a happier person. It'll improve your love life. Come on now. We need a sustained effort. We need a sustained effort because, look, as municipalities and counties and states are facing budget deficits, what do you think, what budget is easiest to simply say, we're going to do it next year and hope for the best? It's that maintenance budget. And so, but we can't say, we got to say, no, this is the time. I commend everybody in this audience to read a book called Bold Endeavors. Say Bold Endeavors. Bold Endeavors. I'm not trying to sell this guy's book, but I am saying that this is a book that just says, look, during the toughest times in this nation's history is when we made the boldest endeavors about our nation's infrastructure. It was during the Civil War that we made the Intercontinental Railroad. It was during the Depression that we electrified rural America. It was during the 1950s in the post-war era where Eisenhower, who was trying to get through Germany and thought it was going to be a hard, long slog, ran into the German Autobahn and got through that country and then inspired him to say we need an interstate highway system. But we are living on our grandparents' infrastructure, people. Can I just see, just by hands, your applause? Are you willing to fight for infrastructure development?
Well, you just gave us one compelling reason that I would certainly like Clark Manus to explain to us, being an architect. How will infrastructure improve our love lives?
I don't know. Obviously, a congressman has the answer, right? That's right. And you enlighten us, right?
It'll make your teeth whiter, too. It'll make your breath smell fresher.
And make you live forever, right?
That's right.
I guess the broader question is the one that has already been raised by the congressman, and that is, people will say infrastructure and maintenance will cost a great deal of money in very tough economic times. As an architect, how do you make the argument that in the final analysis, an investment in infrastructure and maintenance of infrastructure is a saving rather than a long-term economic loss?
Well, it's really as simple when an architect works on a project and talks to a client being an end user. You either pay for it up front or you pay for it in the long run. And it always costs more money longer if you have deferred maintenance and you're not dealing with the problems, because the problems just compound themselves. One small problem leads to another one. And I think that's part of this sort of let's only spend the money up front and not a lot. And buildings also, this is one of the things that we've learned over time with technology is there are ways that we can look at use of materials. This is a really important part of the architect's bag of tricks, is to look at the use of materials that allow the building to age gracefully. A lot of the buildings that we all look to and think that have great character to them are buildings that were built and designed 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and they've stood the test of time. With our desire to sort of make things more frugal, more financially cheaper, it ends up costing us in the long run. I think it goes back to this attitude. You have to think for the long run that the investment is worth it, and we have to convince ourselves that investment will have. This is not a one generation thing. This is a multi-generation thing where we actually pass on the responsibility to the next generation rather than thinking that it's only on our watch that we're worried about that. And that's this bigger conversation about why sustainability in every aspect is an important part of society's responsibility to look at the generations that will follow ours in 50, 100, or 200 years.
There were recent reports about schools in New York and other cities where kids were being exposed every day to PCBs that cause cardiovascular, immune, and cognitive damage. In children, it has been linked with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, increased aggression, other problems. What about the issue of green schools? Where are we as a country making sure that our children go to school that is healthy, efficient, and an environment in which they can thrive? And what can we do to make sure that we have energy efficient and healthy schools across the country? That's for you, Clark.
No, sure. Well, I thought maybe Kathy.
Oh, well, first the Congress.
Actually, I'm prepared. No, I think it's great.
One of
the things that the AI has begun to do is actually look at what green schools mean, because my wife was a 25-year school teacher in urban schools, taught mostly in portables, which is clearly one of the worst places for kids to learn. The opportunities to raise our level of education means that the way that we look at school design and the way we use technology is important in that. And the AI has actually begun an effort this year that actually will work with mayors in various cities to look at what those elements are that involve the development of schools that have a greater opportunity. And I think there's two parts to that, Kojo. One is the building. The other is teaching a young generation a responsibility when they are entering kindergarten or preschool, that it is they are the future. Their ability to steward, that means that by the time they get to be adults, they will have that culture that we're all talking about that's embodied in that. So there's two parts to that for us. One is the way schools get designed and looked at and working with school districts. The other is actually to help early childhood education make it a part of the culture. And I think that is, again, it goes back to this, it's a chance that we have now when our economy is coming back from the depths, is to look at what those opportunities are and not lose that opportunity that's in front of us in the way that we make this investment in our own society.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because here in the District of Columbia, over the course of the past 4 years or so, we have seen a number of our public schools beautifully renovated. They look like new buildings, but one has to talk about what Clark talks about, and that is making the relationship between entering this new building and sustainability, and that has to do with what we teach our children in school.
Well, you know what? In Minneapolis, we have a number of schools that have zero carbon footprint. And these are not just excellent buildings, they are learning laboratories, because, you know, the facilities people and everybody really educates these children on, you know, what this building is. And so you have, you know, small children who can explain, you know, why the building is faced a certain way, how the solar panels work, how different heating units work, and how certain building materials retain heat. And so here's an interesting statistic. Most adults learn environmental information from their kids. That's a fact.
That's right.
Now where are they going to get this environmental information? At the school they go to, perhaps.
That's right.
Here's the other reality, too, and I want to just thank Clark for his comments about this school, because I absolutely agree with everything you said. And that is the reality that so many of our kids, most of them, are going to school in old, beat-up 20th century buildings that may even be 19th century buildings, where you have rusty lead pipes, and, you know, and they're really an embarrassment. And kids, there's inadequate heat, there's inadequate windows, they're incredibly inefficient. And we got it. This is also a national disgrace we've got to do something about. Sadly, the American Recovery Act would have had a lot more money in it for school building, but due to politics, compromises had to be made in order to get certain people's votes. We had to up the tax cut and cut the school building. That's politics.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Congressman, because that actually was a real problem that the AIA was really concerned about, that we weren't investing in our future.
So, I mean, that's, I mean, I don't have anything to add on what Clark said. I think he pretty much said it all, but I do appreciate you allowing me to add on.
Larry, the point at which you get to testify before Congress about access to public transit, a lot of members are going to say, look, this guy wants greater access to public transit because it means that we'll be therefore employing more people in transit. His union will be getting more members. They'll be getting stronger. They'll be making more donations to elected officials.
Sounds good to me.
This is all just a self-interest on his part. How do you convince them that, no, this is a national interest?
Well, you know, isn't it interesting that billionaires can cry out for tax cuts for themselves and nobody says self-interest? Bus drivers having good jobs and good pay is in the interest of society as a whole. I'm not so sure that, you know, Mike Bloomberg in New York getting a tax cut is in the interest of society as a whole. So, and I think we as a nation, we as a people have to stop being ashamed of the notion that everybody should get a fair share of what's produced in society. And somehow or another, they've done that to us. They've done that to us over the last 20 or 30 years. You know, we've been convinced that having a middle class, well, they say we have a middle class, right? But sustaining the things that will sustain a middle class are somehow wrong, and that's greed is when somebody makes $60,000 a year, not when a billionaire gets a tax break. That's about reframing the whole discussion in the country. I do also want to point out that, you know, all the architecture in the world can build some great schools, but you need a school bus to get them there, you know. And and I'd hate to think we're going back, you know, now that we've, you know, taken away Rosa Parks' bus. I'd hate to think we're going back to the days of Abe Lincoln walking 10 miles to school. And honestly, you know, one of the things that's happened is in New York City, for example, in Staten Island, where I actually come from, they have taken away school buses from 7th and 8th graders, you know, I mean, in this latest round of cuts. So, you know, there's something sick here that we have to deal with, but we have to acknowledge it first, that you know, we have to reframe this.
Thanks, Kojo. Sorry to keep doing this.
Sure.
Politicians' occupational hazard.
Now we know how he got elected.
But I just want to say that the reason we have 9% unemployment is because we have inadequate demand in our economy, and the reason we have inadequate demand is we have high unemployment. So the way to boost this economy is to put people back to work.
Finally, for you, Kathy Gerwig, we've all seen the Kaiser Permanente commercials, Thrive. What does thriving have to do with Kaiser's efforts to run your facilities on renewable energy and carpeting without vinyl and thermometers without mercury?
Well, I think it's really what we've been talking about, a culture of sustainability. You know, we think about a concept called total health, and that means that you get good exercise, you have good nutrition, you have fun in life, you do meaningful work. All of that is part of total health. It's not about the doctor's visit, it's about a holistic view of health. And so, you know, that's what thrive means. And so, again, you know, the close connection between climate change and disease, heat-related diseases, severe weather, people being injured, new infectious diseases, all of that is part of climate change. I've already spoken about environmental toxicants that cause cancer and other diseases. So you can't have health and total health absent a view of those environmental connections. You know, we're right now installing 15 megawatts of solar power on site at facilities in California. We just signed an agreement to put 4 megawatts of fuel cell energy at some of our sites. And that's not just to reduce our carbon footprint, that's to reduce the impact of our operations on climate change, because that impacts health. And by the way, we're making those strides cost effectively. We're either cost neutral or saving money on that solar and fuel cell energy. So it's good for business, it's great for our communities, and it's certainly good for the planet.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Kathy Gerwig is Vice President, Workplace Safety and Environmental Stewardship Officer with Kaiser Permanente. Can we hear it for Kathy Gerwig, please? Clark Manus is President of the American Institute of Architects. Lawrence Hanley, who allowed us to use the Rosa Parks analogy, we'll obviously be stealing that, you know. We'll be using that in future, is International President of the Amalgamated Transit Union. And Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison represents the 5th District of Minnesota, and he has taught us all. And because he has taught us all about how infrastructure can improve our loved lives, we can now say to you, go forth and multiply. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks a lot.